Witches remake is actually good? The first thing you should know about me is that I'm incredibly biased against reboots. I won't even try to deny that. I think the vast majority are cash grabs designed to prey on your sense of nostalgia, rarely adding anything new to the source material and often becoming shallow interpretations of the original message. That's not to say that every film reboot is automatically bad, because good filmmaking is good filmmaking. But more often than not, I'm left disappointed and wanting. However, that wasn't the case with The Witches. I actually think it holds its own and is something a new generation of children will love, laugh at, and be positively terrified of. It's by no means a perfect film, but compared to other recent reboots, it's a breath of fresh air. Before I get into this review, I want to say that I'm not familiar with Roald Dahl's books. I never read them growing up and only ever saw them at the Scholastic book fairs I was too poor to actually enjoy. I have, however, seen the numerous film adaptations of his work, from Matilda to James and the Giant Peach to Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. I'm bringing this up because it was brought to my attention that Dahl was a rumored anti-Semite and racist, and that it is believed that these ideologies were slipped into many of his books. In the description of this video, I'll link an article that breaks down the anti-Semitism present in Dahl's original story of The Witches, and here's a great video by Lindsay Ellis about the death of the author. I wanted to be made clear that I'm judging this new 2020 version against the previous 1990 film, not necessarily how it compares to Dahl's novel. If you're hoping to hear me complain about the film not upholding the source material, don't hold your breath. For those who aren't familiar with The Witches, whether that be the book or the movies, let me briefly summarize what happens. And obviously, there will be spoilers. Leave while you still can. Our story begins with a young boy who lives with his grandmother, an ex-witch hunter. After meeting a witch in his hometown and his grandmother getting struck by illness, the two go to a hotel for an extended holiday. Unbeknownst to them, the hotel is also the location for an annual witch convention operating under the guise of a society for the prevention of cruelty to children. The boy wanders about the hotel, accidentally coming upon the Grand High Witch and her followers as they get rid of their disguises and reveal their true witch form. The Grand High Witch tells her followers her plan to transform all the children of the world into mice, trying it out via potion on our protagonist and another young boy staying at the hotel. The two boys run around the hotel, evading capture, and eventually make their way back to the boy's grandmother, who helps them devise a plan to stop the witches. Their plan is to steal the witch's potion and use it against them, turning them into mice via a bowl of soup. The witches are eventually defeated, and the boy and his grandmother set out to kill the rest of the witches of the world. The end. Now that you know the background, let's get into my thoughts on the 2020 remake. Changes. This is something I was worried about the moment the change in setting and time period were announced. The original film follows Dahl's book, which takes place in Norway, but this film takes place in late 1968 in Alabama, a period of time, like much of the United States' history, that was an incredibly dangerous time to be Black. And while this is a children's film, I think it's important that filmmakers don't try to pretend that things were all fine and dandy if you were Black in America. The film subtly brings us up through interactions at the hotel.
How do you know it'll be safe there?
Because, child, ain't nothing but rich white folks at the Grand Orleans Imperial Island Hotel. And witches only prey on the poor, the overlooked. The kids ain't think nobody's gonna make a fuss about it if they go missing.
Can I help you?
You can unload this car while I check into this hotel.
Yes, ma'am.
Here's the key. Oh, and
No, you keep your money, ma'am, and enjoy yourself.
And aren't you a lucky fella? Hmm? It's not every day that a young gentleman such as yourself is fortunate to come and stay in such a fine hotel as this now, is it?
I know there will be some people who will say that that sort of thing is unnecessary in a children's film, but I couldn't disagree more. If The Land Before Time and Neverending Story can address the grief of losing a parent, and An American Tale can tackle racism and immigration, more children's movies should too. It's important to understand that the witches aren't the only thing this boy has to fear, and in a sense, it makes his decision to remain a mouse at the end of the film more understandable.
I actually don't mind being a mouse. I get to hang out with my new friends all day, don't have to go to school anymore. And I don't have to learn how to drive, which means I'll never get into an accident.
Another slight change is the addition of another child turned mouse, voiced by Kristen Chenoweth. She's apparently been a mouse for over a year, which I guess explains why she sounds like a middle-aged woman if we consider how short the lifespan of a mouse is. Honestly, she's mostly there to lecture the boys. I do think that the three mice have a believable friendship and their interactions are honestly adorable, but that's really all we get from the change. I can't think of anything she does in the film that couldn't be given to a different character. Heavy-handed visual effects. This is a qualm I have with a lot of movies nowadays. I understand that animation is a growing industry that is constantly evolving and increasing in popularity, but I miss the days of practical effects. In the 1990 film, there's no denying that the mice are obviously fake, but at least in scenes where they don't need to talk, we get to see actual mice doing the stunt. Whereas in the film, everything from mice to cats to chickens are animated. And while it mostly passes, even treading into Uncanny Valley at some points, I know in a few years it'll look dated, like pretty much all animation. Other than the mice, I also think their use of computer animation on characters like Anne Hathaway's Grand High Witch were somewhat off-putting. Unlike the previous film, which had Angelica Houston in absolutely amazing prosthetics, this film relies on animation and a bald cap. This version of the Grand High Witch has a Glasgow smile, a forked snake-like tongue, and missing digits on her hands and feet. Her smile reminds me of the Cheshire Cat, and everything else looks like a PG version of Splice. That's not to say that this version of the witch isn't scary, because there are definitely moments where she is, but half the time I'm distracted by the visual effects. Plus, a creepy grin can't hide how gorgeous Anne Hathaway is. Nice try though. Fabulous costumes. If you asked me what I thought about the clothes designed by Joanna Johnston, it's very easy to say that I liked them. Almost everything Anne Hathaway wears is positively divine. However, if we're talking about historical accuracy, then we've got a few problems. In the early 1960s, women's clothes had a boxier, straighter silhouette. A style icon of this time was Jackie Kennedy, and you can actually see the similarity in her wardrobe choices with the clothing choices in this film. The mid-60s were all about the mod look. Think Twiggy. And by the late 60s, fashion was all about flowy fabrics and silhouettes, what one might associate with a hippie look today. Keeping this in mind, you can see that many of the clothes the female characters wear, Grandma and the lower ranked witches particularly, are fairly dated, looking more like fashions from the early 1960s than the late 1960s. However, I can give this a slight pass considering neither the Grandma nor the witches are said to be particularly wealthy or fashionable. But there are two characters that I think could be improved upon: the Grand High Witch and Mrs. Jenkins, the English mother of another boy turned into a mouse. In Mrs. Jenkins' case, she is a well-off Brit, which means her clothing should have been on trend not only because she could afford it, but also because she'd have access to more recent fashions. I would have loved to see her in some paisley, maybe a maxi dress. As for the Grand High Witch, she has money, a lot of it, so we could assume she'd have enough for new clothes. And she does wear several outfits over the course of the film. While many of her outfits do look believably late 60s, albeit with a 2020 twist, just look at this feathery robe, there's one I do find issue with: the black and white houndstooth outfit. It's absolutely stunning and was likely chosen so the group of witches had a cohesive look. But I would change just one little thing: give her pants. Not only would it have made her a little more fashion forward, but it'd be a touch edgy and help her stand out from the other witches. A believable relationship. A weak point in the 1990 film, at least in my eyes, is the relationship between the boy and his grandmother. They have little chemistry, and that's relayed through his distrust of her telling him witches exist. Whereas in this film, we get to see the relationship between Octavia Spencer and Jazir Kadim Bruno's characters grow. She does her damnedest to get him to open up after his parents' death. It doesn't suddenly come out of nowhere. And his immediate acceptance of her telling him witches are real is evidence that this relationship between the two of them is full of trust and love. So when he decides to stay a mouse so they can be together forever, it totally makes sense.
I couldn't stand being looked after by anybody else. I'll be a very old mouse and you'll be a very old grandmother, and we'll both die together.
Excessive narration. I'm sorry, I just hate this sort of thing in films. I had the exact same problem with the Mulan remake. If you need to use narration to have what's happening in your film make sense, there is a bigger problem. It's completely fine to have narration at points where it makes sense, but I don't need a narrator saying he came upon the Society of Witches when we literally see him come across it. Kids aren't that stupid.
And wouldn't you know, we came upon the big ballroom where it turns out the International Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children folks were going to have their conference.
Acting all-stars. Like almost any person my age, I grew up watching the 1990 version of this film, and like most kids of the time, I was absolutely terrified of Angelica Houston's Grand High Witch. But acting-wise, she is probably the highlight of that film, at least in my opinion. The rest of the actors are a little bit stiff and seem to have trouble delivering the dark yet equally humorous tone of the film. Meanwhile, in the 2020 version, every single actor brings their A game. Octavia Spencer in particular is amazing, but when is she not? Even Stanley Tucci, who isn't in the film as often as I wish he was, gives a memorable performance. It's perhaps Anne Hathaway who is the film's weakest link, surprisingly enough. She seems like she's having a great deal of fun with the role, but her accent is all over the place. One second she sounds German, the next Russian, and the next who knows. I wouldn't have a problem with it if it weren't for the fact that it actually makes her unintelligible at times, which the film does poke fun at, but good God. There's even a point where I thought she said bitch instead of witch.
Look what you make me do.
No garlic in the soup.
No, what?
Garlic.
No garlic?
Did I stutter? No garlic. That was actually a good question, insubordinate, but a good question.
It's not horrible by any means, but it is a bit jarring how cartoonish she acts in comparison to some other characters. Is it scary? If you're an adult, which odds are you are if you're watching this video, no, this movie won't scare you. Although I personally jumped once or twice. But I do think that it will terrify the generation of kids it's intended for, which is kind of the whole point, right? While the 1990 film has perhaps one of the scariest scenes ever presented in a children's film, the movie as a whole isn't all that terrifying. Whereas in this film, the tension is spread out consistently, overall creating a better viewing experience. I'd probably watch it again. What did you think of The Witches remake? Did you prefer the 1990 version? I hope you enjoyed this video, and don't forget to like and subscribe. I'll see you soon. Bye!